I'm one of the best investigative reporters, I think, in the world today.
Hello travelers, and welcome back. I'm really excited to do today's video. This is something that's a little bit different, but it's an idea that I've been really interested in delving into. It's based off an idea that I got during our most recent travels to Elvis Week 2024. We met people from all over the world. Whichever one we're coming back from always feels like the best. They just constantly one-up each other. It's always a great time, always a great way to cap the summer off. And so one of the things that kind of struck me really was something that had to do more with the drive up. We take this drive to Memphis a couple times a year. We have about a 13-hour drive. So like any normal red-blooded American Elvis fan, one of the absolute necessities for this drive is a Memphis playlist. As you can imagine, the majority of this playlist is probably about 12 hours and 45 minutes of Elvis songs. But there are a few kind of must-listen to songs that are on this playlist that I have strategically placed more toward the end of it, so they start to come on really once we're first coming into Memphis. I have to believe in my heart of hearts that I am not the only person who does this. On the trip, I was really thinking about some of these Memphis or Elvis adjacent songs that have kind of become for me a standard issue part of the experience of traveling to Memphis. They're also songs that I tend to listen to a lot when I'm not in Memphis, but missing it. Made me a little bit more curious about diving into them a little bit further and exploring their backstories and histories. I pulled 3 of these songs out. The first one I wanted to talk about is Marc Cohn's 1991 hit, Walking in Memphis. Even the most hardened, dead inside cynics that I know love Walking in Memphis. It creates such a mood and such a sense of atmosphere, as well as just being very earnest, heartfelt, and it's a pretty winning combination. It's also just a very quotable song. It's got a lot of great lines. Who doesn't love the line about the pretty little thing in the jungle room? Or my personal favorite, which is to me the money line. Tell me, are you a Christian child? I said, ma'am, I am tonight. Oh, such a good line. So digging in a little bit into the backstory of this song. This is from Marc Cohn's 1991 album, titled Marc Cohn. Walking in Memphis was kind of the breakaway hit from this album. The positive reception to and success of this song earned Marc Cohn 3 Grammy nominations, one for Song of the Year, Best Male Pop Vocalist Performance of the Year, and Newcomer of the Year, the latter of which he won. Delving in a little bit into the backstory of this song. In the mid-80s, Marc Cohn was in his late 20s. He was a struggling musician who was feeling a little bit frustrated by the fact that he didn't feel like he'd written his kind of one signature great song. Looking at the repertoire of songs that he had written at that point, Marc felt that he had a lot of songs that were good, but nothing that he really loved or felt deeply. Marc at this time was an aspiring singer-songwriter who had kind of fashioned himself in the vein of the musicians that he loved growing up in the 70s, that kind of really signature 70s singer-songwriting. When he looked at the artists that he admired, he noted that he felt like they had all written their kind of signature masterwork at a very young age, much younger than he was at that point. He noted that James Taylor had written Fire and Rain at 18, and that his number 1 musical idol, Jackson Browne, had written his oft-covered standard, These Days, at the age of 16. And he really marveled at that these artists had had the ability to write these great songs at such a young age. He was envious, something that made him feel a little bit behind the curve, that he didn't really have that one great song yet. He really became determined that he wanted to write his one great song. And so he took some advice from an interview with James Taylor, where not-so-sweet baby James had recommended that if you felt stuck or having a creative block and really wanted to get the juices flowing and get inspired, his best advice was to travel somewhere, get away, have a new experience, see what might spark. And so Marc decided to try this to see what material he could get out of it. And I think this part of the story is really interesting. I feel like it's pretty rare where you're deliberately setting out to have that kind of an experience where you're feeling a creative block, having a hard time getting started, and are actually able to overcome it by deliberately trying to have an experience that inspires you past it. This was a strategy that really worked out well for him. So what he decided to do was to travel to Memphis. He was deeply in awe of and drawn to the enormous musical history in Memphis, and felt that by traveling to the birthplace of rock and roll, that he could maybe have this kind of inspirational epiphany. And, you know, it couldn't have worked out better. And that's one thing that's really interesting about the song Walking in Memphis to me, is that on the one hand, it's a very literal description of a weekend he spent in Memphis, all the things he did there, everything he describes in the song, the things that he did when he was there, walking down Beale Street, visiting Graceland, the Great American Pilgrimage, going to Al Green's church. And yet it also kind of works metaphoric. Walking in Memphis also really follows a trend that really describes a pilgrimage, having a spiritual aspect, which I think is an experience that a lot of people have, even people who have never been to Memphis. I think one of the things that's so enduring and powerful about this song, we all get it. It strikes a universal chord. And it was funny, when I was doing research for this, AI Google had kind of described this song as Grammy-based. Some of the reasons that it gave for that was that it evoked both Elvis and Memphis, which is interesting because that kind of speaks to the overarching themes of all three of these songs. I think one of the reasons why they were so popular and why they resonated so much was because they really evoked these kind of universal symbols. And it really gives these songs a power that we all respond to. All three of these songs also won Grammys. I'm going to go ahead for the purposes of this argument to consider Marc Cohn's Newcomer of the Year really a Grammy for this song, that it was the strength of this song that really helped him win. I also came across a couple of less than kind, I thought, references. Marc Cohn is like a one-hit wonder, said in a somewhat dismissive way. This also applies to another artist we're going to talk about. And I wanted to just kind of take a minute to sort of call that out a little bit. That's a little bit bothersome to me to see that term be thrown around in a derogatory manner. Having a hit is a huge accomplishment, whether you repeat it with a follow-up or not, particularly for a song like Walking in Memphis, which really belongs to the ages now. And I think writing something that has that kind of staying power is a huge accomplishment. So this now infamous trip that Marc Cohn took to Memphis occurred in 1985, but it would still take several years for this song to reach the public. Marc Cohn was actually discovered by the criminally fabulous Carly Simon. He was playing in a wedding band at the time that performed at the wedding of Caroline Kennedy. Carly Simon and the Kennedys were very close friends and neighbors on Martha's Vineyard. Carly heard him perform at the wedding, was really impressed by him, really thought he had something, and he really credits her with getting his career jump-started. She took him under her wing, helped promote him to record companies, which finally resulted in him landing a record deal. Led to the album Marc Cohn, which contained the song Walking in Memphis. So we, the public, first heard Walking in Memphis in the early 90s. It was a song that found a lot of public embrace. All of the songs that I'm talking about were hits in my childhood and teenage years. They were products of a different music industry, more kind of adult-oriented, lyric-heavy. For example, it was really interesting to me to read about Marc Cohn and his aspirations of being a singer-songwriter in the vein of these 70s classic navel-gazers. Even by the early 90s, the music industry was a lot different. These performers were no longer the heavyweights, but the legacy of what they had created back in the 70s was still viable. There was still a place for singer-songwriter, story music, VH1 music. In some ways, Marc Cohn really represents the last wave of that. On a personal note, he did face some tragedy in 2005 when he was touring with folk singer Suzanne Vega and was shot in the head during an attempted carjacking. Quite miraculously, after being taken to the hospital to have his injuries tended to, he was released the same day. Now Marc has continued to record, perform, and be a long-standing presence in the music industry.
It doesn't have to end here. Click on one of the videos below for Elvis and more, and we'd love to have you like, share, and subscribe, and maybe even join, so we can put some more gas in this thing.